Now this is very bad. These are burial sites right here. Burial sites. Over 1,000 of white farmers, and those cars are lined up to pay love on a Sunday morning. Each one of those white things you see is a cross, and there's approximately 1,000 of them. They're all white farmers, the family of white farmers. And those cars aren't driving, they're stopped there to pay respects to their family member who was killed. And it's a terrible sight. I've never seen anything like it. Both sides of the road you have crosses. Those people were all killed.
Have they told you where that is, Mr. President? No, I'd like to know where that is, because this I've never seen.
The meeting reportedly started off with a semblance of diplomatic warmth. You know, the usual handshakes, the polite nods, but then things took a turn, a sharp one. President Trump launched into a series of startling allegations about South Africa. He brought up the highly charged issue of large-scale killings of white farmers and alleged land seizures. Mr. Trump wasn't just making verbal claims. He had props. He showed President Ramaphosa images, supposedly of a white South African farmer's gravesite. The catch? He apparently didn't know the location of this supposed site. That's like showing a picture of a random dude and saying, "This is your long-lost cousin." Friend, I think. He lives somewhere, probably. To make matters even more surreal, the very images previously used by Trump was later identified by Reuters as footage from Goma, Democratic Republic of Congo, showing humanitarian workers with body bags after battles. Awkward. As if that wasn't enough, Trump also reportedly played a video. This one featured rows of white crosses, which he claimed were burial sites for murdered white farmers. Again, the visuals were dramatic. The implication was clear. A crisis of epic proportions. However, this footage was later fact-checked. It turned out to be from a 2020 protest against a specific farm murder, a temporary memorial, not a permanent burial ground filled with victims of a genocide. Trump's claim of over 1,000 white farmer killed was an epic lie. The crosses were even taken down by May 2023. Trump asserted that the South African government was expropriating land from white farmers without compensation. This narrative, amplified by certain media figures and online commentators, painted a picture of chaos and persecution. It suggested that a whole segment of the population was under siege, their property and lives at risk. Let's talk about this term, white genocide. It's a heavy one, and it was a central part of the claims being thrown around. President Trump repeatedly voiced concerns about this alleged persecution in South Africa. The idea was that white farmers, in particular, were being systematically targeted and killed. But what do the actual numbers say? Because in a world of loud headlines, sometimes the quiet facts get lost. And when you're talking about something as serious as genocide, facts really, really matter. You can't just throw that word around like confetti at a very bleak party. According to official statistics for 2024, South Africa recorded a tragic 26,232 murders overall. It's a high number, a serious problem the country grapples with daily. Of these, 44 murders were linked to farming communities, and within that number, 8 of the victims were identified as farmers. Now, every single one of those deaths is a tragedy. But to frame it as a genocide specifically targeting white farmers, the numbers just don't support that narrative. In fact, most murder victims in South Africa, by a significant margin, are black. Even looking at figures from groups specifically focused on farm attacks, the picture is different. The Transvaal Agricultural Union, TAU, figures cited by the BBC indicated 23 white and 9 black people were killed in farm attacks in the preceding year. The Afrikaner Farmers Union, TLUC, reported an average of around 40 white farmers murdered per year since 1990. While horrific for the families involved, this still constitutes far less than 1% of total murders in the country. It's a serious crime problem. Yes, a targeted genocide, the evidence isn't there. South Africa's own police minister has called claims of a white genocide unfounded and unsubstantiated. Furthermore, a South African judge in the Western Cape High Court didn't mince words, dismissing the notion of a white genocide as clearly imagined and not real. So, you have the official statistics statements from government officials and even court rulings all pointing away from this sensationalized claim. The narrative of widespread targeted killings of white farmers, while emotionally powerful for some, crumbles under factual scrutiny. It speaks more to a political agenda or misinformation than to the complex reality of crime in South Africa, which tragically affects all communities. So there's President Ramaphosa sitting in the Oval Office. Accusations are flying, misleading videos are playing. It's a high-pressure cooker. What does he do? Does he shout back? Does he flip the table? No. Cyril Ramaphosa, true to form, maintained his composure. He listened. And then he calmly, professionally began to counter the claims. He made it clear that his government promotes democracy. It does not endorse violence against any group, not white farmers, not anyone. He emphasized that the South African Constitution, a document born from a long struggle for equality, protects land ownership rights for all South Africans, regardless of race. He pointed out that the narrative being pushed was simply not reflective of his government's policies or the reality on the ground. It was a direct yet measured refutation. No drama, just a steady presentation of his country's stance. He highlighted that tragically most victims of crime in South Africa are, in fact, black. He also reportedly questioned the authenticity and location of the gravesite image Trump presented. A polite way of saying, where did you get this exactly? And to further counter the idea of a government hostile to white South Africans, he subtly pointed to the presence of a white minister of agriculture in his own cabinet. Checkmate, perhaps? Throughout this intense exchange, Ramaphosa's professionalism was the defining feature. He didn't get drawn into a shouting match. He didn't personalize the attacks. Instead, he focused on correcting the record, on explaining the complexities of his nation, and on reiterating South Africa's commitment to democratic principles and the rule of law. He reportedly stated he would welcome technological assistance to help fight crime and protect South Africans, shifting the focus from divisive rhetoric to constructive solutions. This wasn't just about defending his country. It was about demonstrating a different kind of strength, the strength of patience and reason in the face of provocation. Section 5, the elephant in the room, South Africa's thorny land. Question. Now, let's talk about land, because you can't discuss South Africa, especially in this context, without talking about land. It's not just dirt and grass, it's history, it's identity, it's economics, and it's deeply, deeply emotional. When President Trump brought up land expropriation, he was touching on one of the most sensitive and complex issues in post-apartheid South Africa. The claim was that the government was just grabbing land from white farmers, no questions asked, no compensation paid. A scary picture, for sure. But like many scary pictures, it helps to look at the whole canvas. The history here is crucial. Colonization and apartheid systematically dispossessed black South Africans of their land for centuries. The vast majority of arable land ended up in the hands of a small white minority. This isn't ancient history. Its legacy shapes South Africa today. So, when the Democratic government came into power in 1994, land reform was a constitutional imperative. It wasn't about revenge, it was about redress, about trying to create a more equitable society. But how do you do that? That's the billion rand question, and it's been debated, discussed, and sometimes fought over ever since. President Ramaphosa in that Oval Office meeting had to explain this intricate situation. He clarified that the government's policy is to redress these historical land ownership inequalities. The primary approach? Encouraging voluntary sales, a willing buyer, willing seller model. However, progress has been slow. Frustration has grown. This led to discussions about expropriation without compensation, but within very specific legal frameworks. Ramaphosa emphasized that any land reform would be orderly, lawful, and in line with the South African Constitution, which, by the way, protects property rights for everyone. He wasn't talking about lawless land grabs. He also made a rather astute point, reportedly noting that even the United States government has the power of eminent domain, the ability to confiscate private land for public use with compensation. It was a subtle way of saying this concept isn't as alien or radical as you might think. While a law was signed in January permitting land expropriation in the public interest without compensation in very rare instances, Ramaphosa stressed it had not yet been used. The goal, he reiterated, was to address past injustices in a way that fosters national unity and economic development, not to create new divisions or chaos. Keep in mind that the land was illegally taken from black South Africans. One of the most powerful points President Ramaphosa made during that tense encounter was about the nature of crime in South Africa. When faced with allegations focusing on the suffering of one specific group, he broadened the lens. He stated quite clearly that his government is working to address crime, and that crime, tragically, affects all South Africans. It doesn't pick and choose based on race or background. It's an indiscriminate scourge that the country is battling daily. This was a crucial shift from a potentially divisive narrative to one of shared struggle and shared concern. He further emphasized a stark reality often overlooked in the international discourse. Most victims of crime in South Africa are black. This isn't to minimize any individual's suffering, but to provide a vital statistical context and expose the hypocrisy of those complaining about white genocide. It proves that thought process is still the same. There has been no evolution of the mind. When headlines scream about attacks on one demographic, it can create a skewed perception of where the primary challenges lie. By highlighting this fact, Ramaphosa was gently correcting the narrative, ensuring that the broader picture of South Africa's fight against crime wasn't lost. It's like saying, yes, that's a problem, but let's look at the whole equation, not just one variable. Importantly, Ramaphosa didn't just defend, he also extended an olive branch, sort of. He reportedly said he would welcome technological assistance to help fight crime and protect all South Africans. This was a smart move. It showed a willingness to collaborate, an openness to solutions, and a focus on the well-being of every citizen. It transformed a moment of potential confrontation into an opportunity for partnership. Instead of just saying you're wrong, he was saying, this is a problem for all of us, and we're open to help in solving it for everyone. That's proactive leadership. This advocacy, for all South Africans was a recurring theme in Ramaphosa's responses. He consistently steered the conversation back to the idea that his government is there for everyone, not just a select few. His administration, he implied, is dedicated to building a nation where everyone feels safe and has opportunities, irrespective of their race. This consistent message of inclusivity and a universal approach to tackling national challenges like crime was a powerful counterpoint to the divisive rhetoric he faced. It was a reminder that good governance is about serving the entire populace, not just the loudest voices or the most sensationalized stories. Another piece of evidence reportedly presented by President Trump was a video clip involving Julius Malema, the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, EFF, a South African opposition party. The clip apparently featured Malema and even former President Jacob Zuma, now also an opposition figure, chanting the controversial song Dubul Ibhunu, often translated as "Kill the Boer" or "Shoot the Farmer." Trump also allegedly showed a clip of Malema announcing land occupation without permission and asked Ramaphosa why he wouldn't just arrest Malema for his speeches. This definitely added another layer of complexity and, frankly, political theater to the already intense meeting. President Ramaphosa's response here was nuanced. He reportedly denounced Mr. Malema's speeches, making it clear that inflammatory rhetoric isn't endorsed by his government. However, he also provided context. He pointed out that Julius Malema's EFF is a minority party in South Africa. It's not the ruling party. It doesn't dictate government policy. This is important because from afar, it might seem like Malema's fiery pronouncements represent the mainstream view, which simply isn't the case. It's like judging the entire U.S. political landscape based solely on the loudest person on a cable news show. Not quite accurate, is it? The song itself, Kill the Boer, has a contentious history. It's a historical liberation chant from the anti-apartheid struggle. South African courts have actually weighed in on this. They've ruled that singing the song at rallies can be seen as making a political point about historical grievances and system change, rather than a literal incitement to violence in the present day. Courts have also ruled against designating it as hate speech in certain contexts, acknowledging its historical roots. This legal context is vital, but often gets lost in translation when the song is presented internationally as a straightforward call to murder. As for the claims of the EFF orchestrating large-scale land invasions based on Malema's statements, the reality is also more complex. While there have been instances of illegal land occupation in South Africa, these are often carried out by desperate squatters seeking shelter rather than organized political invasions directed by the EFF. There's no widespread evidence of the party successfully coordinating mass land grabs. President Ramaphosa had to navigate these distinctions, explaining the difference between political rhetoric from an opposition figure, the historical context of certain expressions, and the actual policies and actions of his government. It's a delicate balancing act, separating the noise from the signal. Amidst all the drama and difficult conversations, President Ramaphosa had a clear objective for his visit: to improve the relationship between South Africa and the United States. He stated that South Africa aims to reset its relationship with the U.S. and enhance trade and investment. This is the essence of international diplomacy, moving beyond controversies to focus on long-term mutual benefits. Countries, like people, often have complicated relationships, but that doesn't mean they can't find common ground, especially in economics. It's like saying, okay, we disagree on some things, but can we still do business? Ramaphosa highlighted the existing economic ties. He mentioned that South Africa has over 22 businesses operating in the United States, contributing to the American economy. Conversely, the U.S. has over 600 businesses operating in South Africa, a substantial economic footprint. These are major companies creating jobs and opportunities in both nations. The message was clear. This relationship is already valuable, and there's potential for it to be even more fruitful. Let's focus on growth, not grievances. It's a practical approach that resonates across political divides. However, I must note nearly all, maybe 99.99% of these enterprises, both South African ventures in the U.S. and U.S. businesses in SA, are owned by people of European descent. President Ramaphosa's delegation to the White House included many individuals of European descent, some requested by name by Trump's team. This underscores the integrated nature of the South African economy and its leadership, countering simplistic narratives of racial division. By focusing on these economic realities and the potential for future cooperation, Ramaphosa was steering the conversation towards a more constructive path. He was showcasing South Africa as a partner, a place for investment, and a nation with a diverse and capable leadership. This was about building bridges, not erecting walls. It was a reminder that even when political leaders have very different styles and perspectives, the underlying connections between nations, economic, cultural, and historical, remain important and can be strengthened. It's a testament to looking beyond the immediate storm to the calmer waters of shared interests. So, what do we take away from this whole saga? This intense, high-stakes meeting between President Cyril Ramaphosa and President Donald Trump was more than just a news headline. It was a vivid demonstration of leadership under fire. Ramaphosa walked into the Oval Office facing a barrage of serious, often misleading allegations about his country. And through it all, he largely maintained his composure, his professionalism, and his focus on presenting South Africa's complex reality. It was like watching someone try to explain quantum physics while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. His dedication to balancing the needs of all South Africans shone through. Faced with claims that centered on one segment of the population, he consistently broadened the narrative to include everyone. He spoke of crime as a universal problem, of land reform as a constitutional necessity for national healing, and of his government's commitment to democracy for all its citizens. This wasn't just about political maneuvering. It was about representing a diverse nation grappling with its past and striving for a more equitable future. It's a tough job trying to knit together a rainbow nation when some people only want to talk about one color. The broader implications of Ramaphosa's conduct are significant. In an era often characterized by loud rhetoric and diplomatic confrontation, his approach, calm, fact-based, and dignified, offered a different model. It showed that it's possible to stand firm, to correct misinformation, and to advocate for one's country without resorting to shouting matches or abandoning diplomatic decorum. He even managed to gently school a superpower on its own history of eminent domain. That takes guts, or at least very good briefing notes. This has ripple effects, not just for U.S.-South Africa relations, but for how smaller nations can engage with global powers. Ultimately, President Ramaphosa's interaction with President Trump was a stark reminder of the challenges leaders face in a complex, interconnected, and often misinformed world. He had to navigate a minefield of historical grievances, political opportunism, and alternative facts. His ability to do so with grace and a steady hand, while also pushing for stronger bilateral ties, says a lot about his leadership style. He even found a moment to mention that the great Nelson Mandela taught them how to create peace, a lesson he is passing on. In a world that often feels like it's spinning off its axis, Such steadfastness is not just admirable, it's essential.